cuts will degrade America's standing in the world and curb U.S. soft power. For WPFW News in Washington and WBAI in New York, I'm Sue Goodwin.
We people who are darker than blue, don't let us hang around this town and let what others say come true. We're just good for nothing, they all figure. A boy should grown up shouldn't just.
Peace, everyone. It is Friday, July 11th, 2025 at 5 p.m. So that must mean you are listening to Darker Than Blue, the show where we talk about politics for the people who are darker than blue, like you just heard Brother Curtis Mayfield say. I am Jackie Lukeman, your host. I'm so glad that you have joined me today. There is so much to talk about. But first, I got to shout out my people. I want to shout out all of my comrades in the Black Alliance for Peace, in Pan-African Community Action, in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, everybody who is involved in any kind of anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, anti-colonial organizing. On this day, you've been out in the streets. Thank you so much. I appreciate y'all. Shout out to you, and shout out to my Aunt Clara and Uncle Junie. Happy Friday, y'all, on your date night. I hope you're having a good time. And shout out to all of my family and friends and comrades, and yeah, even some of the detractors who are listening, watching on whatever platform you are listening and hearing me right now. I'm Jackie Lukeman. Hey, y'all. And thank you so much for joining me. Look, the news of the day is still, I think, the victory, unlikely victory of Zohran Mamdani in New York City. So I want to talk about that today because it was a surprising win. I don't think a lot of people expected him to win. We anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, not Democrat or Republican political commentators were all going kind of back and forth about there's name recognition. Nobody knows who he is. People know who Cuomo is, even though they don't like him. Everybody knows who Adams is, and they really hate him. We don't know how this guy is going to do, and we saw how he did. So this is still a big deal. Zohran Mamdani winning the New York primary 2 weeks ago. Polls, in fact, still show Mamdani holding a 10-point lead over Andrew Cuomo in New York City's general election for mayor, while incumbent mayor Eric Adams trails way, way behind in fourth place, behind Republican nominee Curtis Sliwa. And this is according to a new poll that just came out a couple of days ago. Mamdani gets support from 35% of registered voters, followed by Cuomo with 25%, yes, even after everything that he did. Sliwa with 14%, and Adams way down at 11%. Only 11% support from voters. And there's a fifth person in the race, this attorney, Jim Walden, who's polling at 1%, and he's not going to be around for much longer. And why are we still talking about Andrew Cuomo, y'all? Because he is weighing whether or not to mount a serious campaign on his independent fight and deliver line, while the former governor and the current mayor, Adams, Cuomo and Adams, publicly fight each other and are calling on each other to drop out in order to best consolidate opposition to Mamdani. Now, I seem to recall a whole lot of people dismissing the idea of Cuomo running as an independent after he lost in this race. I kept telling people never say never in politics, but you know how some of y'all don't listen. So Adams trails Mamdani among every single subset of voters. Everybody. Nobody likes Adams except for one group of voters. Can you guess? Republicans. Where Adams picks up 26% support compared to Mamdani's 7%. Adams also trails Mamdani and Cuomo among Black voters. Mamdani leads with support among Black voters at 35%. Here's the tricky part. Cuomo is running at about 32% support among Black voters. That's too close to Mamdani. And I think this is where the name recognition comes in, and some weird uh, uh, um, um, probably older, more conservative Black folks and their indoctrinated ideas about socialism, which I'm going to try to get to, probably in the dark room. But yeah, the Black support for Cuomo is very problematic, and I don't understand what's going on. But I do think that name recognition is a part of it. But I also think like this weird anti-socialist, anti-communist foolishness is also a part of it too. So, Adams polling at 14% among Black folks, Curtis Sliwa at 3%. That's a mystery. But okay. Mamdani, of course, won the Democratic primary 56-44 over Cuomo in the final round of ranked choice voting. Now, he's been working to consolidate Democratic Party support for the general election in a city where registered Democrats outnumber Republicans 6-1 and unaffiliated voters 3-1. But, my dear listeners, Mamdani is not going to get Democratic Party support. Not from the party. From individuals, yeah, he probably will, but he will not be endorsed by the Democratic Party. Why do I say this? Because I just hate the Democrats? No, despite that being what some of you believe. No, I'm not saying this because I hate the Democrats. I'm saying this because Democrats hate democratic socialists. Who are not full socialists, by the way, but we'll talk about that at another time. But Democrats do hate democratic socialists and progressives. They absolutely do hate full socialists, and they want to do the same thing to socialists and communists that Republicans do. They do not want Mamdani as the Democratic nominee for mayor of New York City. They sure don't want him to be mayor or a representative of their party at all. Now, I know people get frustrated when we leftists criticize your favorite politicians and your favorite political party, but these things matter when it comes to how people will govern and how they will engage with the people they govern about that governance. I always try to tell you about the time the Democrats ignored the people and their needs and rights, as I fully acknowledge that Republicans are exactly who they say they are. Because right now, while Republicans, including Donald Trump, are pulling out the communist and socialist cards as insults, that's not an insult to me. I am a communist. I am. It's not an insult. I'm going to say thank you when you call me a communist. Thank you. Yes, I am. But Democrats, what are they doing? They're basically doing the same thing. They are not doing any different or any better with their criticism of and attacks against Mamdani. They're using practically the same language. Progressive Change Campaign Committee co-founder Stephanie Taylor was interviewed by Fox News about Mamdani's win, and she said, quote, "This victory shows that a new direction for the Democratic Party is possible, a future of dynamic candidates who appeal to young and working class voters with a platform that fights for the people, not corporations." Well, in order to believe that that is possible for the Democratic Party, you would have to not know the history of the Democratic Party, and you would actually have had to ignore what the Democratic Party did to another upstart progressive challenger Just a few elections ago, Bernie Sanders, for all of his contradictions, what did the Democratic Party do to Sanders and his progressive platform and his calls to fight for the people and his popularity among young and working class? What did the Democratic Party do to Sanders' campaign? Not once, but twice. They're about to do the same thing, only probably a little bit more slick, but the same thing to Mamdani's campaign. So I understand and I appreciate this person's optimism, but yeah, I don't have it, because if you believe that this is a direction that the Democratic Party will allow themselves to be taken into, you don't understand the Democratic Party. But somebody who does, for Matt Bennett, who is executive vice president for the Democratic aligned group called Third Way, hint, hint, acknowledged that Mamdani, quote, focused on affordability, which he said is great. But then Bennett said Mamdani is young, charismatic, a great communicator. All that is great. We want to see that. And you know a but is coming, right? Because it is. Because Bennett then told Fox News, quote, the problem is he has the wrong prescription, end quote. So everything about Mamdani is great, the guy from Third Way says. And Third Way, if you didn't get the hint, Third Way are not moderates. They are conservative Democrats. And I'll explain why. Except Bennett says Mamdani's policies that would alleviate the economic pain of the people is the wrong prescription. And that's what the Democrat said. So I think it's important for us to understand why I keep saying that Democrats and the Democrat Party are not an opposition party to the Republicans, and they are not on the side of the people. And you know what that means, y'all. It means history. Yay, history. I love it. It's so wonderful. I wish we would read. Because we have to talk about the forgotten legacy of the neoliberal policies of a certain president that everybody believes was a saint, but he wasn't. Let's talk about neoliberalism really quickly first, though, because I know that's a word that a lot of people don't know what it really means. Neoliberalism is an economic term. It doesn't denote a political ideology. It is an economic term that sees competition as the defining characteristic of human relations. Neoliberalism redefines citizens as consumers whose democratic choices, freedom, are best exercised not by voting, but by buying and selling, a process that rewards merit and punishes inefficiency. Like if you can afford to buy, then you deserve to be able to afford to buy things. But if you cannot afford to buy, then that's your fault, because you're lazy and you're not innovative enough, and you're not educated enough. Neoliberalism maintains that the market delivers benefits that could never be achieved by planning. And this is a key tenet in the capitalist hatred of communism and socialism. Inequalities eradication is a planned effort by the government that does not focus on maximizing private profits, but focuses on raising everyone's standard of living. Capitalists do not want that. Attempts to limit competition in a neoliberal system are treated as roadblocks to liberty, not to business, but to liberty. Tax and regulation, that should be minimized. Public services should be privatized. That's what neoliberal ideology states. The organization of labor and collective bargaining by trade unions are portrayed by neoliberalism as market distortions that get in the way of the formation of natural hierarchy of winners and losers. This is neoliberalism. Inequality is recast as a virtue. It's a reward for utility and a generator of wealth, which then trickles down to enrich everyone. That's the part of the neoliberal lie that you know, because that's the only part we have been told. Trickle down, the myth of trickle down economics. You let the 1% make as much money as they can. You take away the regulations that keeps them from maximizing their profits, and they will maximize those profits, and those profits will trickle down like rain onto the pores. And you know how that doesn't work. What gets trickled down on us is not profits, for sure. So efforts to create a more equal society under neoliberalism are seen as both counterproductive and morally corrosive. That's how neoliberalism sees any effort by the government to create a more equal society, the planning of the eradication of inequality, right? The market ensures that everyone gets not what they have a right to as human beings, as citizens, but what they deserve as consumers. That is neoliberal ideology. And before 1970, the US enjoyed a lot of economic success under Keynesian New Deal policies, which are not neoliberal. You're going to have to look up Keynesian New Deal policies or Keynesian, because I only have an hour. I don't have time to explain everything to you. So you can look up Keynes, Keynes, yes, and his relationship to the New Deal policies. But the racial discrepancies aside, because the racial discrepancies in the implementation of the New Deal policies, that's a whole nother conversation and another show. But the American middle class was built on the Keynes crafted policies of the New Deal under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But the inflation of the Nixon Ford era eroded those gains, which set the stage for the rightward turn that the Democratic Party took, that many people either don't know about or don't want to admit, particularly because the rightward turn happened during the presidency of James Earl Jimmy Carter, who fully abandoned New Deal policies and the working class. Carter was elected in 1976, and he did indeed inherit an economic mess that was entirely not his fault. What he did in response to it, how he tried to fix it, was entirely his responsibility. And this is where I call Jimmy Carter the deregulator in chief, because the deregulation that he pursued ostensibly to deal with inflation, the long-term effects of that deregulation we are still living with today. And Carter devoted substantial effort to transportation deregulating the transportation industry, and worked with congressional and civil society leaders to pass the Airline Deregulation Act in 1978, the Staggers Rail Act in 1980, and the Motor Carrier Act of 1980, also signed in 1980. These three pieces of legislation began the systematic deindustrialization of the United States under Carter. Innumerable blue-collar jobs and the US's preeminent productive capacity was significantly diminished by this legislation. Carter, who originally claimed to regard unemployment as one of the most crucial issues of his presidency, reversed that policy and focus and decided that addressing inflation was more important than anything else. Trade unionists in the AFL-CIO, who were up until that point an integral part of the Democratic Party electoral base, thought that Carter would produce or propose a public works program similar to the one that came out of the New Deal to reduce unemployment. Why did they expect him to do that? Well, because it worked. Because the New Deal public works program worked, right? And inflation and unemployment was a huge problem in the United States when Carter became president. So they were figuring it worked before. Why not do it again? But Carter didn't do that. He, in fact, refused to enact such a program. And that produced a lot of resentment among the working class, among the trade unionists. Labor was in open rebellion against Carter because of that, and because of the impact that those pieces of legislation that deregulated the transportation industry, the impact they had on the working class. So let's talk about the impact of those deregulating laws. The Airline Deregulation Act. In the 1960s and 1970s, the Civil Aeronautics Board set strict regulations for the airline industry. It managed the routes and set the fares, guaranteeing a 12% profit for any flight that was at least 50% full. And as a result of these regulations, airline travel was so expensive that 80% of Americans had never flown because they couldn't afford to fly. It also took a long time for the board to approve new routes or any other changes. The Airline Deregulation Act that Carter passed in 1978 solved some of this problem. Safety was the only part of the airline industry that remained regulated under this legislation. Competition rose, fares dropped, and more people started flying. But as fares dropped, so did the wages of the airline employers, as the large carriers needed to cut costs to remain competitive with the new carriers coming into the market with non-union and lower paid workers. And eventually, over time, many companies that could no longer compete were merged, acquired, or just went bankrupt and went away. As a result, just four airlines, the ones that we know today, American, Delta, United, and Southwest, control 85% of the US market, creating a near monopoly. And as a result, small and even mid-sized cities like Pittsburgh and Cincinnati were underserved and to some degree are still not as heavily trafficked. It's just not cost effective for the major airlines to keep a full schedule in smaller cities. So smaller carriers serve the smaller cities, but at a higher cost and at less frequency than the major carriers would have. And then second, airlines charged for things that used to be free, like ticket changes, meals, and luggage. That's right, y'all. Did you know that there was a time in this country where you could fly on a major airline and not be charged if you needed to change your ticket, not be charged for the meal, not be charged for luggage? Jimmy Carter's airline deregulation legislation changed all that. And that's why we're charged for these things now. Third, flying itself has become a miserable experience with cramped seating, crowded flights, long waits, all things that airlines were allowed to take away comfort, convenience in order to maximize their profits. So yes, y'all, Jimmy Carter is why flying is miserable today if you cannot afford business class or a first class ticket. Then there's the freight rail deregulation of the Staggers Rail Act that Carter passed. The railroads immediately divested themselves of their unprofitable passenger business. All of the railroads did when the Staggers Rail Act was passed, and they began to concentrate on their core freight activity, the business which was most profitable and least subject to competition from other modes of transport. So railroads faced high fixed cost because they're the only transportation carrier that has to maintain its own tracks, right? The truckers didn't have to maintain the roads. The airline industry, airline industries don't have to maintain the skies, right? They only had to maintain their planes. The railroad industry is the only transportation industry that has to maintain the literal tracks that they have to run their trains on. So yes, the cost of maintaining a rail industry was very high. So the passenger aspect of rail industry added to the cost with all of the safety requirements, all of the physical requirements for having a passenger system, and the additional staff, right? So after the Staggers Rail Act was passed, the rail industries were like, let's get rid of all of the parts of our industry that cost us money. That was all of the passenger rail service. And what they did was they abandoned the tracks that they were previously required to maintain. So over 100,000 miles of tracks were abandoned by the rail industry after the passage of this act, as operators increasingly focused on strategic long distance corridors linking major gateways and inland markets for freight rail only. And then operating costs were further reduced by staff reductions once they got rid of their passenger rail operations. And then the contracts with the unions produced agreements to remove brakemen from the trains, thereby doing away with 1/3 of the personnel required for train operation and removing the need for cabooses. Other concessions that they sought, like hours of work and daily distances crews are allowed to operate, also significantly improve productivity, but not for passenger trains, which didn't exist anymore outside of this antiquated mess that's called Amtrak. So, lots of job losses with the deregulation of the rail industry, no more passenger train system other than Amtrak, and a freight rail system that frequently experiences dangerous and catastrophic derailments due to the lack of regulations that came from Jimmy Carter's rail deregulation legislation. The people of Palestine, Ohio, thank President Carter for his legacy, I'm sure. And then there's the deregulation of the trucking industry. The Motor Carrier Act of 1980, more than 72 freight haulers that were in business in 1978 had shut down, taking more than $2.2 billion or 16% of the industry's revenues with them by the mid-1980s. Another group of companies accounting for $3.9 billion or 28% of the trucking industry's revenues had such poor operating ratios between 1980 and 1982 after this legislation was passed that they might as well have failed, and many of them ultimately did. While many established carriers closed down, thousands of new non-union, low-cost trucking businesses came into existence. And the impact on labor, union labor, has been dramatic. The International Brotherhood of Teamsters, in its own check of 36 locals, found that the percentage of drivers on long-term layoff reached 32.2% of its membership in April of 1983, up from 22.4% in 1981 after this legislation was passed. And today, the trucking industry is in shambles, with pay that has not kept up with productivity or profit for the company, and little to no protection for workers. In every instance of deregulation in any industry in this country, the push for fewer government regulations to allow for greater competition in the market always drives smaller carriers out of business, pushes workers into unemployment, and drives wages down for the workers who remain. Interestingly enough, what isn't talked about are all of the new regulations that are put into place to govern who is allowed to compete and who is not. The new regulations that are implemented favor the industry and their ability to make unlimited profits over the workers. So these industries really, they're not really completely deregulated. It's just that the workers' abilities to benefit from their labor was significantly reduced, and the bosses were given practically unlimited power to steal from the workers and consumers and citizens to maximize their profits. But you shouldn't be shocked at how Carter's policies negatively affected American workers, not if you know that Alfred Kahn was a key advisor to Carter, and Kahn was the architect of Carter's airline deregulation policy, which led to the deregulation of the other industries. Why is Kahn a big deal? Because Thomas Franks wrote in his book, Listen Liberal, a quote that he heard from Alfred Kahn while he was an advisor to Jimmy Carter. Kahn is quoted in Thomas Franks' book, Listen Liberal, as saying, quote, "I'd love for the Teamsters to be worse off. I'd love the automobile workers to be worse off." And Kahn then goes on to say that unionized workers are exploiting other workers. This is the guy that good guy Jimmy Carter hired to deregulate industries that gutted their unionized workforces. But more than any other event, the process of deindustrialization and its related defeat of labor, right? Because that was a key, a reason for deregulating industry, to break the back of union labor. That accelerated even from this when Carter nominated Paul Volcker as head of the Federal Reserve. I'm not kidding. Volcker's remedy for purging the economic system of inflation was to inflict economic depression. Volcker proceeded to gut the US's industrial base with astronomical interest rate increases, with a prime rate as high as 22%, constricting productive activity. And the Federal Reserve's attempts to fight stagflation only made it worse. Between 1971 and 1978, the Federal Reserve raised the funds rate to fight inflation and then lowered it to fight recession. This stop and go monetary policy confused businesses. Well, it didn't confuse them. They just kept their prices high, even when the Federal Reserve lowered the rates. And that, of course, sent inflation shooting up to 13.3% by 1979. And what did Carter do? He enacted an austerity program by executive order, justifying the measures that the Fed took by observing that inflation had reached a crisis stage. Both inflation and short-term interest rates reached 18% in February and March in 1980. The policy, as well as record interest rates, would lead to a sharp recession in the spring of 1980. The sudden fall in GDP during the second quarter caused unemployment to jump from 6% to 7.5% by May, with output in the auto and housing sectors falling below 20% and to their weakest level since the 1975 recession. But this kind of economic shock is the kind of thing that Milton Friedman and his neoliberal acolytes felt was the prime canvas on which to paint their market-focused, socially starving policies, and Carter approved of it all. And yes, you're going to have to look up Milton Friedman yourself too, because we are almost at 30 minutes past the hour. Actually, we're a little past it, but I want to say real quick, Carter, let's not forget that it was Carter and not Reagan who presided over the beginning of the dismantling of the New Deal regulatory system in airline, railroad, and trucking industries. Intended to reduce inflation by reducing the costs of essential infrastructure to business, Carter's market-oriented reforms instead produced constant bankruptcies and predatory hub-and-spoke monopolies in the airline industry, a private railroad industry that's abandoned passenger rail for freight and is deeply unsafe, and underpaid and overworked truckers. And just in case you were wondering, Carter and Reagan were similar ideologically in other. But we got to take a station break at just a little past 30 minutes past the hour. So, engineer extraordinaire, what do you have for the people today?
The Institute for Policy Studies, alongside the Wallace Global Fund, Public Citizen, and The Nation magazine, invite you to their second annual Henry Wallace Symposium, Bold Ideas for a New Progressive Majority, taking place on Thursday, July 17th from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. at the University of California, Washington Center. Speakers include Representatives Pramila Jayapal, Greg Kassar, and Jamie Raskin, along with Lisa Gilbert of Public Citizen and IPS Executive Director Tope Falarin. That's the second annual Henry Wallace Symposium, Bold Ideas for a New Progressive Majority, on Thursday, July 17th from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. at the University of California, Washington Center on 1608 Rhode Island Avenue, Northwest Washington, D.C. More information about how to register can be found online at ips-dc.org/events. WPFW is your station for jazz and justice, building a better world one broadcast at a time.
Thank you so much. Now let's get back to this history of Jimmy Carter, the deregulator in chief, and how his neoliberal policies connect to the attacks on Zohran Mamdani today, because they do. Now, Carter and Reagan were very similar in the way they exploited the white backlash in the aftermath of the Civil Rights Revolution that had led many white Southerners and white Northern ethnics. I didn't call them that. This is from an article that I got this from, I think, in Politico, to defect from the Democrats to support third-party populist candidate George Wallace. See, Reagan did this in an obvious and blatant way by beginning his general election campaign in 1980 in Neshoba County, Mississippi, where white supremacists had firebombed a black church and had murdered 3 Northern civil rights activists, Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, and James Chaney. In a thinly disguised appeal to white Southern racism, Reagan declared at his opening campaign event, "I believe in states' rights." But Jimmy Carter used similar coded language in fishing for votes from white ethnics in the North who objected to blacks moving into their neighborhoods. In an interview with the New York Daily News in April 1976, Carter said this, quote, "I see nothing wrong with ethnic purity being maintained. I would not force a racial integration of a neighborhood by government action," end quote. A few days later, when he was questioned about this remark, Carter elaborated saying, quote, "What I say is that the government ought not to take as a major purpose the intrusion of alien groups into a neighborhood simply to establish their intrusion," end quote. Listen, y'all, this is nice guy, Sunday school teacher, Christian Baptist Jimmy Carter that everybody thinks is a saint, sitting here talking about, I don't like integration for integration's sake, and people who are not ethnically pure in this neighborhood are alien. Come on. But if you don't believe me in how disgustingly racist this commentary was, Jesse Jackson called Carter's comments a throwback to Hitlerian racism. He compared it to Hitler, y'all. Carter not only won a majority of the Southern vote with this kind of rhetoric, but he also did well among those white ethnics in the North that he came out and declared he was on the side of. Now, look, I don't tell you these things because I inherently, irrationally, and in a knee-jerk Pavlovian way respond to and hate the Democrats, as I am often accused of. No, dear listeners, I tell you these things about Democrats because I hate liars, and I hate opportunists, and I hate political manipulation of the masses who think these people are always the good guys to the GOP's perpetual evil. I tell you these things because this is real history as it actually happened. And the fact that Democrats don't want you to pay any attention to this tells you more about them than it does about me telling you about them. So I'm sure you're wondering what in the world this has to do with the way the Democrats are coalescing to run Mamdani out of the New York City mayoral race and out of the Democratic Party. Well, this next bit of Democrat Party history also proves that the Democratic Party never returned to its post Jim Crow roots as a populist advocate for working class, poor, and marginalized people political party. Carter started the move, but this was an intentional strategy to completely separate the Democratic Party from the working class. And it started with the formation of the Democratic Leadership Council when Al Gore, Lieberman, and the DLC distanced themselves even further from blue collar Americans. The DLC was established in the wake of President Ronald Reagan's 1984 landslide victory, in which he won 49 states over Democrat Walter Mondale. Now, pondering the Mondale defeat, a gathering of Southern Democrats and Northern neoliberals, not the nice guys, y'all, expressed concerns that the Democratic Party faced extinction, particularly in the South and West, if the party continued to rely on its New Deal message of government intervention. Government intervention to do what? To equalize society. And kept catering to their traditional constituencies of labor, minorities, and anti-war progressives. Yes, the Southern Democrats and the Northern neoliberals were like, the blacks and the workers and the anti-war lefties, they're going to destroy us. Let's get rid of them. So in 1985, Al Fromm, F-R-O-M, then an aide to Representative Gillis Long, Democrat of Louisiana, took the lead in formulating a new messaging strategy for the party's centrists, neoliberals, and conservatives. Will Marshall, at that time, Long's policy analyst and speechwriter, worked closely with Fromm to establish the Democratic Leadership Council. In his Saving the Democratic Party memo of January 1985, Fromm advocated the formation of a governing council that would draft a blueprint for reforming the party. According to Fromm, the new leadership should aim to create distance from what he called the new bosses, organized labor, feminists, and other progressive constituency groups that he claimed were keeping the party from modernizing. Al Fromm called the people that the Democratic Party was supposed to be advocating for, that they claimed they were advocating for, he called the people the new bosses. And these are the Democrats, y'all. So Fromm's memo sparked the formation of the DLC in early 1985, and within a few weeks, it counted 75 members, primarily governors and members of Congress, most of them from the Sun Belt, and almost all of them white. Liberal critics instantly dubbed the group the White Male Caucus. Although DLC members shared, for the most part, the neoliberal perspective of centrist Democrats, such as, I know you're going to know some of these names, Gary Hart, Paul Tsongas, and Michael Dukakis, all neoliberals, they took a much harsher conservative stance on social issues and foreign policy issues. Regarding foreign policy, the DLC attempted to resurrect the hardline anti-communism of Senator Henry Scoop Jackson, but rejected the New Deal politics that Jackson and other traditional New Deal liberals embraced. So when you've got Democrats today talking about we can't have a socialist governing New York, we can't, these socialist policies from Mamdani, they're the wrong prescription. This is the history that perspective comes from. The anti-communism in the Democratic Party was an intentional strategy that they adopted to get rid of the left in the Democratic Party. Then, in the late 1980s, DLC Democrats supported aid to the Contras in Nicaragua, who fought the Sandinistas, who ran out the dictatorship backed by the US of the Somoza family. Yes, which is part of the reason so few Democrats really spoke out against the Iran-Contra CIA drug connection scandal, applauded Reagan's evil empire rhetoric, yes, they did, and offered their support to those militarists, calling for missile defense and rejecting arms control negotiations. Then, in a 1986 conference on the legacy of the Johnson administration's Great Society initiatives, DLC chairman Charles Chuck Robb of Virginia took up the neoconservative critique of liberalism, first articulated in the early 1970s by, guess who, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, Norman Podhoretz, and other neoconservatives. A Democrat adopting neoconservative rhetoric. According to Robb, he said these words, not me, quote, white racial discrimination has by no means vanished from our society. It's time to shift the primary focus from racism, the traditional enemy without, to self-defeating patterns of behavior, the enemy within, end quote. Chuck Robb, nice white guy senator from Virginia that everybody loves so much, he said that. Adopting the neoconservative rhetoric of racism isn't really white people's fault, it's Black people's fault because y'all are trifling and you're lazy and you don't want to work and you want handouts. That's what this is. Democrats saying this. The modern post-New Deal Democrats, the third way Democrats. So from its inception, the Democratic Leadership Council was at loggerheads with progressive Democrats and other liberal leaders. One of the most outspoken DLC critics was, again, Jesse Jackson, who once said that DLC stands for Democrats for the Leadership Class. The DLC's goal was to advance a message that was less tilted toward minorities and welfare, less radical on social issues like abortion and gays, more pro-defense, and more conservative on economic issues, wrote Robert Dreyfuss in a 2001 article in The American Prospect. He went on to say, quote, the DLC thundered against the liberal fundamentalism of the party's base. Unionists, Blacks, feminists, Greens, and cause groups generally, end quote. Within the DLC, populism was not merely out of favor, it was it was militantly opposed. The organization had virtually no grassroots supporters. The DLC was funded almost entirely by corporate donors. Its executive council, Dreyfuss reported, was made up of companies that donated at least $25,000 and included companies like Enron and Koch Industries. Yes, that Koch Industries, Koch Industries. A list of its known donors includes scores of the United States' most powerful corporations, all of whom benefit from a Democratic Party that embraces big business and is less reliant on labor unions and the grassroots for support. The organization's influence was significant, especially in the 1990s. The New York Times reported that during that era, the Democratic Leadership Council was a maker of presidents. That's how Bill Clinton became president. Its influence continued into the post-Clinton years, though. Al Gore, Joe Lieberman, John Kerry, John Edwards, Dick Gephardt, and countless others, Barack Obama, all lent their names in support of the organization. And Obama supported the organization that came after the DLC, which was a part of the DLC, which is the Progressive Policy Institute. Yeah, the DLC and its think tank, the PPI, the Progressive Policy Institute, were well financed and published a seemingly endless barrage of policy papers, op-eds, and declarations in their numerous publications. When Al Gore a DLC member since its first years, chose DLC chairman Joseph Lieberman to be his presidential running mate, the DLC staff felt triumphant. Al Fromm predicted that soon, quote, we'll finally be able to proclaim that all Democrats are indeed new Democrats, end quote. However, many high-profile Democrats, including former presidential candidate Howard Dean, publicly disavowed the organization. Dean once criticized the DLC's new Democratic agenda as, quote, the Republican wing of the Democratic Party, end quote. Howard Dean said that about the Democrats long before Jackie Luqman came along and said things you don't like about the Democratic Party. But it is interesting to see how Howard Dean and politicians like him, Democrat politicians like him, have come full circle now in fully supporting the establishment, anti-populist, anti-progressive, third way Democratic Party establishment that he once so passionately and accurately railed against. You see how that works? This is why we keep saying the Democratic Party cannot be reformed from the inside, because they changed from the inside, basically creating a political party that is intentionally resistant to populist reform, because they kicked all the populists out of the party and they continue to do it. So the height of the DLC's triumph may well have been in the 90s when it claimed President Bill Clinton as its most prominent advocate, celebrating his disastrous welfare cuts, which were supported by his wife as the First Lady, celebrated and supported the North American Free Trade Agreement. And we've talked about that and the terrible impact that it has had on American labor. His speech declaring that the era of big government is over. Yeah, it wasn't Republicans who said that first. It was Clinton. Maybe he didn't say it first, but he sure didn't have a problem repeating the Republican talking point about big government being your enemy. These initiatives had the DLC's footprints all over them. The DLC's prescribed third way also found a home on Downing Street in England, where Tony Blair, a major Clinton ally, was a staunch advocate of the DLC, adopted its strategies, and lent his name to its website. According to the book, Clinton and Blair, The Political Economy of the Third Way, Blair said in 1998 that it, quote, it is a third way because it moves decisively beyond an old left preoccupied by state control, high taxation, and producer interests. Worker interests, Tony Blair said. So Ronnie and Maggie weren't the only US, UK, British political soulmates. So just about at the end of this show, probably got about 3 minutes left. So what's third way? In the United States, third way adherents embrace fiscal conservatism to a greater extent than even traditional economic liberals, and advocate some replacement of welfare with workfare, and not some. They advocate the complete dismantling of the welfare state and forcing everybody to work, whether they actually have the physical capacity or they're elderly and shouldn't be working or not. And sometimes they have a stronger preference for market solutions to traditional problems than liberals and even some conservatives do, while rejecting pure laissez-faire economics and other libertarian positions. The third way style of governing was firmly adopted and redefined during the administration of Bill Clinton, and the term third way was introduced by political scientist Stephen Skowronek and represents this ideology, this hyper neoliberal ideology. But third way presidents undermine the opposition by borrowing policies from the opposition in an effort to seize the so-called middle, and with it to achieve political dominance. Let me say that again. Third way presidents and third way policies and third way strategy in general is to undermine the opposition, the Republicans, by borrowing policies from the Republicans in an effort to appeal to the middle to achieve political dominance. Nowhere in that strategy is meeting the needs of the people, eradicating poverty, advancing equality in society, reducing inequality, ensuring everyone has access to affordable and quality health care, housing, education, a clean environment. Nothing in third way policy is focused on doing anything for the people. Third way policy in the Democratic Party is all about undermining Republicans by borrowing their policies, packaging them as Democratic policies or bipartisanship in order to appeal to moderate Republicans and conservative Democrats while abandoning the left. And not just abandoning the left, but stabbing the left in the back, setting the left on fire, and kicking the left off a cliff. That's the Democratic Party that we are faced with today. That is the Democratic Party that sabotaged the campaigns of Bernie Sanders. That's the Democratic Party that crushes progressive politicians who enter the party thinking they're going to change the party from the inside. And that's the political party that is now coalescing a campaign to scuttle Zohran Mamdani's campaign, his campaign in New York, and if they can, completely push him out of the party. So when I talk about the Democrats operating in a way that is not dissimilar to the way Republicans govern, taking away from the spectacle that the Republicans are adding to this escalation of these policies that both parties believe in and share, it is absolutely true that the Democrats are very similar in policy and strategy to the Republicans. And that's true, not because I said so and not because I made it up. It's true because that is the strategy that the Democrats employed and have been using ever since Bill Clinton in order to win elections and to stab the American working class and poor in the back. But I am out of time for Darker Than Blue for this week. Hey, if you want to continue this conversation and talk about some of Zohran Mamdani's policies compared to full socialism and what that means and why Democrats hate socialism so much, stick around. Go over to Black Liberation Media on YouTube, Black Liberation Media on YouTube, and hang out with me in the dark room for a little bit. Thank you so much. A luta continua, dear listeners. The struggle continues, but if we keep paying attention to this history and understanding what it is and who it is we are up against, Victoria acerta. I promise you, Victoria is certain. Victory is certain. Peace. What up, y'all? It has been a minute. It has been a minute for a dark room. I know. And I don't know what it is, but these people on Friday night, they get the popping off as soon as Darker Than Blue finishes. So as soon as Darker Than Blue is over here on the other side of the woods on Mississippi Avenue here, folks are popping. It's not even dark yet, and they out here busting off. And I'm waiting for Kimathi to jump up and howl like a maniac because he hates loud noises. But so far, he's okay. So let's hope. Woo-wee, y'all. Yes, so it's been a while since I've done a dark room because I have been very tired, but I've also been very busy finishing this book that I am sending to the publishers Sunday. I'm sending at least 4 chapters, I think. I think I've got 7 chapters. I think I'm sending at least 4 chapters to the publishers Sunday. And I'm going to work on the other 3. And then by the time I finish working on the other 3, the edits from the first 4 chapters are going to come back. They're going to rip that. Oh, they're going to rip it apart because I'm prepared for it. Because that kind of thing, I'm sensitive about my art. And writing is my art. So I'm preparing for just a complete abstract painting, Jackson Pollock looking kind of edits. But I'm actually really proud of myself that I wrote a book. I wrote a book, and I think it's going to be published, and I'm so excited. But let's get back on hating on the Democrats, shall we? Because I like this more than pretty much anything. Because I swear, y'all, I understand that people in the United States don't know what socialism and communism are. I know this is true, and I know that it is true because I know about the history of propaganda and anti-communist indoctrination in this country. All of this stuff, all of it. It's all, even Carter was on the we need to stop the spread of communism tip. And why? What did communism do to anybody in this country other than save the world from fascism by defeating the Nazis? You would think that we would be forever grateful to the Soviet Red Army, but nope. But see, I guess the fascists would be upset that the communists defeated their friend. So, I want to talk a little bit about Mamdani's policies and the way the Democrats are attacking him, calling him a flat out socialist. And he's not a socialist. He is a democratic socialist. And there is a difference. But I'm going to explain it this way. I think I'm going to explain it this way. So let me go down here. Mamdani. First, I think I want to say that I'm happy he won, right? Like I did, I did when I did a little bit of background reading on him. I can't call it research because, Googling stuff is really not research. I know that, but I do that all the time. But doing a little bit of background reading on him, yeah, he did. He's been kind of dodgy on the Israel thing. He has said things like, Israel has a right to exist as a state with equal rights. Well, listen, no state has a right to exist. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is the thing that I think anti-imperialists in particular, and socialists and communists specifically, get really annoyed at when people they elevate the status of a state to human status. And that's not, a state doesn't have a right to exist. Human beings have a right to exist. Plant life has a right to exist. Animal life has a state. A state does not have an inherent right to exist. A people have a right to decide what type of environment they want to organize themselves in, right? And individuals have a right to determine what kind of state they want their state to be. So all states are also not created equal, right? So a state is not inherently good or inherently bad. A state just is. It is what people develop as a way of organizing society and developing themselves, right? So a state, whether it is good or bad or whatever kind of way it expresses itself, does not have an inherent right to exist, right? So that is foundational. That's the first thing. The second thing is Israel in particular. And any settler colonial state absolutely doesn't have a right to exist, because settler colonialism is established through genocide and theft, right? So should a state that is established on those principles exist? No. And it doesn't have a right to exist because it didn't have a right to do those things, or because those things are violations of human rights and human dignity and international law. Right? So a state that exists on genocide and land theft and lies, they don't have a right to exist. So the answer that includes any iteration of Israel has a right to exist is the wrong answer, period. And I don't believe Mamdani is unintelligent. I think he knows these things, but he's a politician. So that's a political answer. He gave a political answer, threading that needle between, between the progressives, who clearly want, at the very least, for the occupation of Gaza to end, for Israel to end its occupation, right? At the very least, and certainly for the genocide to end. So he's threading the needle between the progressives and their demand for justice for Palestine, and the liberals and their support of Israel. And while politically, I know what that is, morally, that's cowardice. It is. It just is. And I said that about Mamdani, and people were upset with me, but you know what? I'm used to y'all being mad at me, so whatever, man. It's true. So no, I do not agree with that statement from him, and I'm never going to agree with that statement from anybody. I don't care who says it, because it's bullshit. Aside from that, I'm glad that doesn't negate that it was good that Mamdani won this election, particularly in the way that he did with ranked choice voting. This proves that ranked choice voting, it works. It works for the people, doesn't it? Didn't it kind of? So of course, this is why the Democrats are going to be like, we have to get rid of that. we're going to get rid of that. There's never going to be another ranked choice. Nothing. Never. But their claims that Mamdani is, a socialist are no different from the Republican claims that Mamdani is is an evil, crazy socialist and communist. And while the ideology of anti-communism among politicians is rooted in a particular outcome for certain people in this country, most people in this country have no idea what communism and socialism are. Politicians do. I'm convinced that most of them know damn well that socialism and communism are not evil, that communism is not, automatically authoritarian. How in the hell can anybody accuse any socialist country of being authoritarian living in the United States? Where students who were protesting on their college campuses for their universities to divest from genocidal Israel were expelled from school, had their scholarships revoked, kicked off campus, denied their diplomas, arrested, thrown in jail, some deported. That's not authoritarian, and this is an alleged democracy. No, those are just talking points that these politicians say. Most people actually believe that's true. So I do think that we do have to understand what socialism is, because, I'm a socialist, talk about it all the time, and I have to stop assuming that everybody understands what it is I'm talking about. So let's talk about it. being a democratic socialist for Mamdani, his policies are progressive, and that is great. Which way is this thing going? But his policies are not fully socialist. What does that mean? Let me. Usually, when people in the US, particularly politicians like Bernie Sanders, talk about socialism, they are talking about democratic socialism, the Nordic model in particular. And I love how they make a big deal about using the Nordic countries as their model, as their example, because there's a little problem with that they don't really want to admit. But Mamdani being a member of DSA in particular, I think gives us a window into the problem with the concept of democratic socialism, the way we understand it, right? Because the Nordic models of socialism, what is it, Sweden, Scandinavia, all of these European countries that have some aspect of a robust social safety net. That's what it really is. It's not full socialism. It is that these countries have a capitalist system, but they have a strong social safety net. And within that capitalist system, some of the country's revenue is redistributed to this strong social safety net, but they stop short of full socialist policies like government guaranteed housing for everybody. Right? Do you understand what I'm saying? So although politicians like Bernie Sanders and Zohran Mamdani and democratic socialists know about Venezuela and Cuba and Tanzania and Vietnam, and yes, they know about these non-European socialist countries and China, they know about them, but they don't want to reference them because those countries are fully socialist and they do something that the democratic socialist Nordic countries do not do. And that is to guarantee the human rights of all of its citizens are met by the planned policies of the government, which means the government controls some industry, the government controls some private property, and the government ensures that housing, healthcare, education, human rights, clean environment are provided for by those revenues from those industries. But I think the key way that democratic socialism, as we understand it through DSA and folks like Sanders and Mamdani, and full socialism, I think the key way that I am trying to kind of understanding the difference is in the makeup of DSA all by itself, because DSA in the US is predominantly white. So this is why I think when people were asking about Mamdani, what is his outreach like in the Black community? You know, how is he going to appeal to Black people? It's because if people know anything about DSA, they know that DSA is largely white. And they know that DSA they don't talk to Black people. Not really. Not only does DSA not really talk to Black people, but politicians in general, white politicians in general, non-Black politicians in general, don't generally talk to Black people. So this is why whenever there is a political race, whenever there's an election and some candidate comes along and he captures the attention and the imagination and the support of the Black community, people are excited because politicians in this country generally don't fuck with Black voters unless they really need to win an election. And then what do? They come and they tell us how badly we're behaving and how we need to, they do the finger wagging. Politicians talk policy to white voters. They talk respectability and personal responsibility to Black voters. And when I say politicians, I mean all of them. Because remember, Barack Obama and his finger wagging every time he got in front of a bunch of Black people. Every time. So when I look at DSA, and I look at the way DSA exists, the way they operate, the way they organize, I think looking at the way DSA exists in the United States, at least, I can't tell you how they operate anywhere else in the world, but looking at the major Democratic Socialist Party in the US, the problem is there's a party full of white people. So, of course, people are wondering if Mamdani can win over Black voters, especially since in the poll we just talked about in the first hour, I mean, Cuomo has 32% support among Black voters in New York. And Mamdani has 35%. That's too close. Why has Mamdani not been able to capture the attention and the imagination and the support of more Black voters? Because they clearly hate Adams, right? But how are they still sticking with Cuomo? And I really do think that part of the reason is because of how DSA is, because of what DSA is, because of how they exist, how they operate, who they talk to, who they don't talk to. DSA does well in neighborhoods that are gentrified or gentrifying, right? DSA will do door knocking, but they're not going to door knock in all Black neighborhoods. No, I'm not. So if we're looking at the difference between democratic socialism as a concept and socialism, well, there you go. I mean, I don't think it can get any clearer than that for me. Because here's what happens a lot of times when we have this conversation about socialism, democratic socialism. The democratic socialists will invariably tell you that all you have to do is have universal policies for the working class and everything else will be fixed. Right? And I am not at all saying that universal class specific policies are not important. Sure they are. Of course they are. Yeah. But universal health care, and this is the same argument we had with Bernie Sanders, same argument. Universal health care will not address racism in healthcare delivery. Universal health care will absolutely benefit all people, Black people in particular. Absolutely it would. But we will still have to deal with doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals who have a certain bias toward Black people about the way our bodies work differently from white people's bodies. Not because they're inherently racist, mind you, but because that is what they are taught in medical school. Okay, that I am convinced that most doctors are not just like, clan members. I don't think that's true. I think some are. I think plenty are. But I think a lot of the racism in healthcare delivery happens because the entire institutional framework in this country is built on white supremacist ideology, including the educational system at every level and in every aspect of this society. So I don't care what it is you go to school for, you are learning some white supremacist, settler, colonial, patriarchal, xenophobic, racist bullshit. I don't care what you go to school for. So I think, and this is just me, but I really think that the reason there is such a disparity in every aspect of healthcare delivery and the quality of healthcare delivery and the effectiveness of it and our lifespan and our health outcomes as a result of it. There is such an enormous disparity between healthcare outcomes for Black people compared to white people in this country, not because all the doctors and nurses are white and they're all a bunch of Klan members, but because their educational institutions indoctrinate them with white supremacist ideas about how Black and brown bodies work differently from the way white bodies work. And these are the same people who know damn well that there is no genetic anything that determines race, but they still believe that somehow Black people's kidneys work differently from the way white people work. Do you understand? You see what I'm saying? They still believe that Black women can endure pain more than white women can. So white women are the ones who need the epidurals and the drugs. Black women can just tough it out, and Latinx women and Chicano and Mexican women, they can just tough it out because they're used to it. Indigenous women, do you understand? This is the kind of thing that we experience in the healthcare environment in this country that is not going to be addressed, corrected, or improved by universal health care. So in a democratic socialist society, first of all, there is no universal health care. There's subsidized health care, and that's great. But what does the government do about unequal outcomes for different groups of people in that system, even if it is subsidized? Well, in a system that is in a country that is largely homogenous in their population, why do they need to? They don't have to deal with those problems, right? Not to the scale that we do. And because it is not something that the government takes upon itself as a function of protecting and taking care of its citizens, which is the socialist ideology, democratic socialist governments don't have to deal with things like inequality. They don't have to deal with the government planning to direct its resources to reduce inequality. They don't have to deal with the government implementing programs and plans that have to be measured and outcomes that have to be validated, and you have to prove that you've made this better. Democratic socialists don't have to do any of that, because they're like, look here, we subsidize housing, we subsidize some education, we subsidize some healthcare, but we're not socialists over here. You're still going to have to make your way in this world after all of that. But in socialist countries like Cuba, right, where people have been saying, oh, Cuba's people, the left exceptionalizes Cuba, but Cuba has racism. Well, you know why racism exists in Cuba? Because of colonization of the Spanish. And they brought their racist asses over there to Cuba and colonized and enslaved people. So yeah, colonized societies, the societies that have broken the yoke of colonization, still have to contend with the vestiges of that colonization. And racism is one of those vestiges. So, in a socialist society, the government also takes it upon itself to actively and intentionally plan to allocate resources and strategies and programs to address that aspect of the social condition of the people the government is responsible for taking care of. That's the whole point behind socialism. Socialism, by definition, I'm going to read the definition of the socialism to you once I get my right mouse going. Okay, socialism is an economic and political system where the means of production, distribution, and exchange are owned or regulated by the community as a whole. That's also not an aspect of democratic socialism, often through the state. The core idea is to reduce economic inequality and ensure that wealth and power are distributed more fairly among the population. And I'm trying to get to this point in my big old script here. My script is 28 pages long, and I don't know why I think I can get through all of this in an hour, but I be tripping myself out doing that sometimes. So when I look at Mamdani, and I'm very hopeful. I actually am really hopeful. I hope he wins. I do. I hope he wins, and I hope he gives them hell. I also know that if he wins, the Democrat establishment in New York is not going to let him pass any of the barely socialist policies that he has. You're not getting free bus fare, even if Mamdani becomes mayor, because the Democrats are going to do everything they can. The Democrats are going to do what the Republicans did the first day of Obama's presidency. If Mamdani wins, the Democrats are going to come. They may not do a press conference, but they are absolutely going to be like, we are going to make sure he is a one-term mayor, and we are going to do everything we can to make sure none of these policies get passed. So when we're talking about advocating for socialism, what does this mean? And why I don't know. I don't know that I want to keep asking why people think these awful things about socialism, because look, propaganda in the United States is not just misinformation and lies that's propagated by the political class. We're also talking about the entire entertainment industry, the whole, and everything: music, television, movies, books, newspaper, everything, and now social media. So people believe the crazy things they do about socialism and communism and socialist and communist countries, of which there really are not purely socialist communist countries. Even countries that are socialists, that are run by communists, have a mixed economy. So there's no such thing really as a purely socialist or a communist country, although US politicians will tell you that there are. But the reason y'all don't know anything about communism and socialism, and what you think are lies, and you think that they eat babies and they hate America and they hate our freedoms and all that kind of stuff, is because of the movies you watch. If you like action movies like I do, you've probably seen every World War II movie that has ever existed. Because I like a good war movie. So I had no idea that for years I was indoctrinated into believing that the United States won World War II and defeated the Nazis. I had no idea that they didn't. Now, yeah, the United States were a part of the Allies, and okay, they did some fighting, all right, but it was the Soviet Red Army and the tens of millions of Soviets and Chinese who defeated the Nazis. This is why in Russia, They commemorate their victory in what they call the Great Patriotic War, World War II, with a gigantic military parade because they saved the world from Nazism. They saved the world from fascism. And what did the fascists who inspired the fascists do? Continue to punish them for doing that all this time. Same thing about with China. I didn't even know that China was involved. I didn't, because I went to public school in the United States, y'all, just like you did. So imagine my surprise to find out that China was involved in supporting the Soviet Union in their defeat of the. So China celebrates their victory over imperialist fascist Japan that they were fighting during the battle against the Nazis at the same time. So they celebrate their victory over fascist Japanese aggression in their participation in the global war against fascism, that's what they call it, with a military parade. So we don't know how deeply, deeply indoctrinated we are against the very systems and the people who defeated fascism in World War II. And that's ironic, may not be the right word, but that's rich coming from the government that enacted the policies that inspired those fascists over in Germany to do what they did, the way they did it. So when politicians in this country, particularly Democrats, now taking up this anti-communist, anti-socialist, oh, Mamdani is a socialist, we can't have him. Man, shut up. No, you want socialism. You absolutely want not to have to worry about how you are going to afford to keep a roof over your head so that you don't develop a health condition from stress, either the stress of worry or the stress of having to work 2 jobs so you can afford to eat and not have to live on the street. Right? So let me talk about what socialism is. Socialism, there are key aspects of socialism that need to be demystified because socialism is not the devil. It is something we should all aspire to. Public ownership. Major industries like healthcare, education, utilities are commonly owned or controlled by the government. Why? To prevent exploitation by those private entities and industries. So just this past couple of years, I'm here in Washington, D.C. Our energy company is PEPCO, the Potomac Electric Power Company. PEPCO was recently acquired by this company called Exelon, private company. I and a bunch of folks were like, oh no, our rates are going to go up. And sure enough, this past few months ago, I got a $1,500 electric bill. $1,562.87 electric bill. I called, like, what the heck? I have never used this much energy in my life. And, they come with the excuses. Well, that winter it was cold. Well, it's cold every winter. My winter has never been $1,500 cold. And I look at my bill and I see that my bill went from $130 in the coldest month. Like, I think it was December. No, it was $230. It was $230 in December to $400 in January. And then it went from $400 to $800. Then it went from $800. Then another $400 came from somewhere. And the next thing you know, it's $1,500. That's the kind of exploitation that state control of utilities eliminates. You know what your utility bill is going to be every month because the state controls the rates and how much is charged for the rates. And if the state also controls the energy production, then your utilities are even more affordable, if not completely. Do you understand? That's socialism. Socialism also focuses on economic equality, and it actively, intentionally works to reduce inequality through progressive taxation, social welfare programs, and wealth redistribution. Now, here's the thing in socialist governments that people don't understand. At the point of a socialist revolution, yes, land redistribution might happen, and it should happen, because usually the land that's being redistributed are plantations. But in an established socialist society, like, say, China, there is no need to take from the rich. Rich people exist. They exist. They're there. And they are taxed at a much higher rate than everybody else. And they know they're going to be. And they're like, well, you know what? To keep the working class from breaking down my door, cool, take the taxes. All right. Because the Chinese and people in other societies have a different way of existing in community with their fellow society. They actually do see themselves collectively as a people and not just an individual in society. Maybe not down to a person, but as a culture, yeah, that is a part of Chinese society. So even the rich people in China are like, yeah, the taxes are high, but you know what? The party has eliminated abject poverty. So I'll pay the taxes. Our people are healthy. Our life expectancy is long, and our people are educated. And look at the technological advances we are making. We're doing all of that because we are paying these taxes, and because the state owns industries in key sectors of this economy. So the state owns industries in the telecommunications sector, in the aerospace sector, energy production, and in aerospace. Or also, what do you want to go? Ironworks. Yeah. So there's no need under a socialist system that is established to take stuff from the rich, because that's what people think. That socialist governments maintain their social programs by constantly stealing stuff from the rich, and the rich become the peasants, and that's not true. Taxation, state control of key industries, and the redistribution of that wealth, not everybody's wealth, but that wealth, the taxation and the revenue made from the state industries. That is how socialist governments maintain their social programs and their socialist commitments. They tax the rich a commensurate amount. They don't tax people out of existence, but they tax the rich their fair share, and the state makes money through their ownership and control of certain industries. And we talked about that a couple weeks ago about the state owned industries in China. Other countries do the same thing. Another way socialism works for the people is through central planning, because this, taxing the wealthy at a fair level and state ownership of industry is only one part of the commitment of socialist governments to taking care of the people, because you have to carry plans out with those resources. And that's where the central planning in socialist governments come in, because in a socialist country, the government does not leave the responsibility of reducing inequality or addressing any injustice up to NGOs and churches and charities and private corporations like these people do in this country. The government believes it is their responsibility to address any issues in society that put roadblocks in front of the people and keeps the people from developing and advancing. That's socialist ideology. So the central planning of a socialist government does play a significant role in planning how to redistribute those resources to meet the collective needs of all the people. That's the key. All of this is done for the collective needs of all of the people in society, not just to appease the corporate bosses, the 1%, the ruling class, and the political class. Socialism sounds so evil, doesn't it? And then, of course, social welfare, the strong emphasis on social welfare. Free or subsidized healthcare, education, housing, unemployment benefits, retirement benefits. And not just benefits, but putting constraints around the labor environment so that people are not relegated to just existing in society as workers. And this is something that I kind of had to shift my own thinking about because, as a leftist in the US, I focus a lot on the workers, the working class and the poor. But is that all we are? I've really had to start thinking about how I am thinking about how we are advocating for the society that we want for people. Are we advocating for building a society that is beneficial to just workers? Because everybody isn't going to be a worker, because there are children and they shouldn't be working. I don't care what anybody says. They should have a childhood and enjoy it. There are students who should be able to just focus on their studies and be the best students that they can be without having to work. They can work if they want to, but it shouldn't be a requirement for them, or else they can't go to school. People who want to be homemakers, maybe they don't want to be in the formal labor market, men or women. And then, of course, there are the disabled who may not be able to work in any kind of capacity, physical disability, emotional, mentally, and the elderly. The elderly shouldn't be working nowhere, doing nothing. There is no heartwarming story about a 76-year-old greeter at Walmart who was given a certificate and what is it? And a voucher for Red Lobster because he hasn't missed a day's work in 5 years that he stopped. Man, fuck you. Old people should not be working. And honestly, workers, able-bodied workers in the prime of their years, 6 to 8 hours tops. And I don't even like the 8 hours a day. I don't. I think 6 hours of work a day is enough. If you can't get done in 6 hours, everything you need to get done in a day, you're doing too much. They got too much on you. That's not work. They're trying to oppress you. That's not, studies have shown that people are more productive when they work in short periods of time, separated by periods of rest. This is true. These studies are all over the place. People are more productive in like 4-hour increments. This is why in countries where they get to work early, they work for 4 hours, they have a 2 or 3 hour siesta in the middle of the day, and then they go back to work. Those people are productive. They get things done. In the United States and in the West, our deal is that we are not satisfied with accomplishing something. Like everything is a competition in this place. We're not satisfied with the fact that, we graduated high school. we decided to go to college. We were able to go to college. We got a college degree, and we now have a job in our chosen field. But now we have to compete to be the top of our field. Now we have to go get an advanced degree because all of the elites in my field have advanced degrees. So I have to have an advanced degree to be recognized as an elite. But we've got an elitism problem. We've got a competition problem. We can't just be satisfied with our own personal progress as human beings who live to fight another day. No, we have to make everything a competition. Life is not a competition. When you are on your deathbed, all the people that you got one over on, they will neither save you nor push you closer to death. They ain't going to be there when you take your last breath. So all those people that you spent all of your time and your life and your energy and your talent and your passion focusing on being better than, you could have just been enjoying your life. You could have just been enjoying your family. You could have been out in nature, really appreciating the beauty of all of creation. You could have been learning a new skill, a new language, discovering a new genre of books or movies to enjoy. You could have learned how to paint. You could have learned how to ride a horse. You could have done any fucking thing. But instead, you decided to spend your life trying to prove that you are better than everybody else around you. And I am so sorry that you are that miserable in your own skin, that is the only thing that you think gives your life meaning. Because it's not. Human beings, we don't exist just to work. So I'm really starting to think about my organization and how I am talking about the kind of society we want on the other side of this thing. Because I don't want just a worker-friendly society. I want a society where human beings can be the fullest version of ourselves that we want to be in whatever context that is, whether it's a worker, whether it's a retired person, whether it's a stay-at-home mama or daddy, whatever. Just be the best, fullest, most fantastic, happiest, most content, most fulfilled you that you can be. And that can only happen when you are not constantly worried about how people think about you, what your profession says about you, how people look at you because you only make a certain amount of money, or oh my God, I have to get another job because I am not making enough money to pay my rent and I'm going to be homeless if I don't get another job. Oh my God, I have a dental emergency and I can't afford dental insurance because my job doesn't provide dental insurance. So I don't know how I'm going to get this tooth pulled because I can't afford it, but it's killing me. And then you end up dying because, the rotten tooth infected your blood. You do know that you can die from a rotten tooth. Yes, it's true. So socialism, from what I understand of it, from the way I am seeing it, from the way I've seen it in action, Cuba, Venezuela, China, varying degrees of economic mobility in each of those countries, varying degrees of political strength and control, right? Because I would say that in Venezuela, the socialist party's willingness to keep working with the opposition pisses me off, and it just weakens the project. And there's a whole lot of other stuff, right? Cuba suffers from economic depression because of the anti-communist attacks on Cuba by the U.S., because of the blockade, because of the increasing sanctions, right? China China is a whole damn flex. And I'm just like, y'all are just showing off because you can. And I don't blame you. But China is able to enjoy economic success with a high level of the carrying out and the successful completion of multiple, like dozens of Communist Party directed 5-year plans to address inequality and social issues. But they're able to do that because the Communist Party of China controls China. And although the United States government has issued sanctions and their tariffs, as the Chinese official told me, we don't care. We don't care. We don't care what the US does, because we are going to take care of our people in the way that we believe is best for us to take care of our people. China has been able, through a combination, and I haven't quite figured out how precisely how it got to this point. I think it is a part of the result of the efforts by the early leaders of the People's Republic of China after it was established after the end of the war of Japanese aggression. They did try to have diplomatic relations with the West. The West did recognize the establishment of the People's Republic of China as a good thing. I mean, there are newsreels, there is video of the inaugural celebration of the establishment of the PRC, where US officials are there and they're celebrating, and they're, so I think that the early years of the PRC, there were efforts to make nice with Washington. And then when it became clear that Washington was on that anti-communist tip, then those relations became strained. But I don't think China has ever really stepped completely back from the policy of trying to maintain some type of diplomatic relationship with nations, even nations that have been antagonistic toward it. Now, I don't like that. I don't agree with that policy, but I believe in self-determination. And if China believes that's what they have to do to maintain their ability to take care of their people, then okay, I don't live in China, so I don't have to deal with it. But I do think it says something for, I'm wondering if it does inform the way that at this point China has been able to develop so far, so much in such a short period of time, that at this point, I'm not sure that there's anything the US government or any other Western government could do to cripple or to slow down the pace of China's development. I haven't been able to wrap my head around or really figure out or really dig really deeply into the history to find out why China hasn't been attacked the way Cuba is being attacked. Why China doesn't have a problem with the opposition in China. We know about Taiwan and Hong Kong, but in mainland China, why they don't have a problem with the opposition like Venezuela does. Right? These are questions that I admit that I had once I went to China. Like, wow, literally I'm thinking, how have they been able to get away with all this great socialism? Jesus. And not have the US, try a coup that they have. But I guess I am still really trying to figure out how China has not succumbed to the attacks on it that Cuba and Venezuela and other socialist communist governments have been subjected to. That's a question I have in my mind that I have not answered yet. But I do recognize that China is able to fully realize its socialist project up to this point partially because it doesn't seem to me that they have had to deal with, or maybe they have been in a better position to withstand and overcome attacks from the US that other socialist communist countries have endured, just barely. And because of that, because nothing that has been done to try to stop China has actually worked, China has been able to develop their socialist model the way they have, and the things that they're planning on doing still, because they are still cranking out 5-year plans like they have nothing better to do, because China is an enormous country, 1.4 billion people. Development hasn't reached to the isolated, more remote regions yet, but you can see it going there. They're literally not done, right? So, and you look at that and you say, I want a society where if the elderly want to go dance in the park at 6 o'clock at night, they can go dance in the park at 6 o'clock at night. And if the mommies who are staying at home and the daddies who are staying at home want to bring their kids to the park during the day, have a place where they can convene and take care of each other and their kids, it's there. There is a community center that the party has in every neighborhood, so that if everybody in the neighborhood has a concern, they don't have to hope that a party official is going to come to them. The party is there. And they have a direct connection to the party. That where food is not prohibitively expensive, where if people want to own a business, they can. Yes, private business ownership exists in socialist societies, despite what these psychos over here tell you. That's just a damn lie. Socialist countries have private businesses. China does, Cuba does. Cuba actually just expanded, allowing more private businesses as a response to the economic degradation of the blockade. True, I think, but still, the idea of private business ownership and entrepreneurship is not like, it's not verboten in socialism. It's really not. But capitalists will tell you that because they don't want you to know that, yes, you can have a government that takes care of the needs of its people while you also you are able to pursue your entrepreneurial dreams. You can do that in a society, in a socialist society, because it's done. Another aspect of socialism, obviously, workers' rights. Obviously, labor unions, fair wages, workplace democracy to protect workers from exploitation. Whole point behind a socialist system is that people are not exploited for profit by the corporate ruling class. There is no corporate ruling class in a socialist society. But there are different types of socialism too. Democratic socialism, what we talked about, that achieves some limited socialist goals through quote unquote democratic means. Sweden, Norway, those are the countries that y'all mentioned in the chat. Marxist socialism, which is based on Marxist theories, advocating for a worker-led revolution to overthrow capitalism. Now, is a worker-led revolution necessary to establish socialism in every society? No, it's not. Grenada happened, and that happened through an election. The Venezuelan, Chavez's second attempt at overthrowing the right wing in Venezuela, that was an election. It was an election. He tried armed struggle the first time, didn't work, threw him in jail, got pardoned, got out, ran for office, won an election. So, so an election can bring about a new government that attempts to implement socialist policies, because that's what Maurice Bishop wanted to do. That's what the New Jewel movement wanted to do. That's what Oh, of course, I just drew a doggone blank. Hugo Chavez. That's what he did, right? So yes, yes, there was an armed struggle in Grenada. Yes, they did, but there was also an election. Correct? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought there was an election as well. So if I'm wrong, please correct me. But so there doesn't always have to be a worker-led armed struggle. But in this country, I don't see it happening any other way. I could be wrong. And like I said, when I'm wrong, please correct me. But I don't see it happening any other way in this country, because this country is a capitalist dictatorship. It is a fascist capitalist dictatorship. And you can't elect fascists out of office, because the other party is fascist too. So you keep getting fascists no matter who you vote for. All right. So then there is market socialism. Market always means capitalism. It always means like trade on the open market. Market socialism combines socialist planning with market mechanisms like cooperatives competing in a market. So like when the workers at I can't remember the name of the grocery store now. It wasn't Trader Joe's. I think it maybe Albertsons, one of those grocery store chains where the workers bought it, basically, because they were the corporate bosses were gonna eliminate wages, or reduce wages, eliminate benefits, and the workers were like, nope, no you're not. So they bought it. And so the grocery chain is now a cooperative. Well, they still have to compete on the market with other grocery store chains. So that's kind of an example of market socialism, where yes, cooperatives exist by the workers pursuing them, not the government supporting them, but then the cooperatives still have to compete in the same market with the big corporations. All right. So I probably got the grocery store name wrong, but it was one of them in the past couple of years. And then, of course, there is state socialism. People like to call, oh yeah, I forgot that Aldi is a worker. I think Aldi is worker owned too. I think. Yeah, then there's state socialism, where the government controls key industries, but private property might still exist. And yes, that is China. Private property does exist in China. I saw all of those Chinese businesses owned by individuals, mom and pops, restaurants all over the place. There are corporations. There's McDonald's, there's KFC, was there Wendy's? No, but there's 7-Eleven. And you can find those in the bigger cities, not so easily in the cities that are farther away from the coast. But what you find a lot of, all of the restaurants, all of the clothing stores, all of the owned by, those are private businesses owned by Chinese people, usually a family. They are regulated, just like all industry is regulated in society. They're regulated, but those businesses are owned by those people, not by the government. So, to recap, capitalism prioritizes private ownership and private profit, but the private profit specifically of the corporate bosses. That profit in a capitalist system is not shared with the people who produce the materials that the profit comes from. In a capitalist system, free markets determine everything. The market determines everything. These people treat the market as if it is a sentient being. They really do. When they say, the market will correct itself. How the hell is the stock market going to correct itself? It doesn't correct itself. Oh, the market will make sure that the benefits, the profits will trickle. How does the stock market make sure that the people who built the car get a cut of the profit, a bigger, more fair cut of the profit from the material that they built that created the profit? The market doesn't do that. The market doesn't do anything. The market does nothing but provide a vehicle for rich people to gamble with your and my money. That's it, that they're not sharing with us. Socialism prioritizes collective welfare, government intervention to ensure collective welfare, and reducing inequality, because that is the goal of collective welfare. Now, toasty in here. Now, I want to say this about Marxism, because I don't know why, man. I don't know why. I'm just so amused at people, at the things that people get upset about. I don't know that I understand or really get all of the antagonism toward Marxism. Marxism, Leninism as European, and therefore they don't have anything to do with us. Marx and Lenin, heroes of mine though they are, all they did was the same thing that Isaac Newton did. They observed something that was an interesting phenomenon to them in the wild, and they wrote it down. That's all they did. They literally saw how capitalism was developing. They saw the degradation of the capitalist class against the working class. They saw the working class and their rights being more and more devalued and more crushed. And they kind of speculated how things would go based on the material conditions of where they were at that time. So it's not that Marx and Lenin are telling the rest of the world, this is the way socialism has to be everywhere else it exists. As far as I know, I don't think they ever said that. As a matter of fact, I think it was Marx who said, I didn't create anything. I just took good notes or something or other like that. And absolutely made connections between the exploitation of capitalism to the exploitation in slavery of Africans. Marx absolutely did do that. So these claims that Marxism-Leninism is Eurocentric and has this inherent either antagonism toward or irrelevance for Africans is very weird to me, but then again, I have to remember people don't read. So people who say this about Marx and Lenin haven't read Marx or Lenin. But then again, I feel like you don't even have to have read them, because going back to Sir Isaac Newton, I have not read anything other than what they told me in school about him and gravity. And okay, he came up with the equation for gravity. So because he was European, should I ignore the laws of gravity? That what goes up must come down, because what goes up doesn't come down now because Newton was a white guy? Is that the argument? Because that makes no damn sense. Socialism has been practiced, some form of collectivism, some form of government commitment to collective care for its people. This has been occurring in societies all over the world for millennia. Socialism is not something that Marx or Lenin or anybody came up with. It is how people have lived. And the formalization of it, I guess, if you want to call it that, the documentation of it, yeah, Marx and Lenin did that, but they're not even the only ones. They're not even the only ones, because Cabral made these kinds of observations about worker struggles and peasant struggles in Africa. So did Nkrumah. I mean, look, so I don't, what we're fighting for is not, and this is my perspective. Other people will have a different perspective, but for me, I'm not fighting for Marxism, Leninism. I'm not fighting for any particular. No, I'm fighting for socialism, and you can ascribe to that framework whomever you believe analyzes your framework for socialism the best for you. But just because Nkrumahism, Cabralism exists, it doesn't mean that Marxism, Leninism is some foreign thing that has nothing to do with this. It's all socialism, y'all. It is all socialism. And some people, just like people do with every book that exists, 5 different people will read the same book and get a completely different meaning from the same text. So yes, some people are looking at Marxism, Leninism and saying that we have to follow this exactly to the letter of what they said. And that's not what they said to do, but that's what people feel like they need to do anyway. And then you have other people who will take from Marx and Lenin what makes sense and look at their material conditions and say, okay, well, I agree with him here, but this is a separate thing. What are we going to do about this? And you do have people who are just like, I'm not reading or listening to anything Marx and Lenin says. I'm only going to listen to Nkrumah. I'm only going to listen to Cabral. I'm only going to cool. But this idea of throwing any of the people who documented this for us to even call it a name and know what it is that we're fighting for, I don't understand that. I don't understand that. And I think it bothers me more than I think it should, but it does kind of bother me. And I haven't exactly put my finger on why. I can't figure out if I'm just annoyed that people do it, because I really do think it's when people say that, you know, they don't fuck with with European Marxism, Leninism. To me, that is like, oh, so you're not a socialist. Because what we're talking about is socialism. I'm not sitting here advocating for Marx or Lenin or China or Russia. No, we live in a capitalist dictatorship. We live in a fascist capitalist dictatorship. We need socialism. Call it whatever the hell you want. But can we please stop fighting amongst ourselves about which brand of socialism? How about let's defeat the fascist capitalists and fight for socialism for all of us? That's all I got for tonight. I got to finish writing this doggone book. I got some more writing to do tonight. Thank you all very much for hanging out with me a little bit. I appreciate you. I think I will see you next week. Things are crazy busy. I do not know where I'm going to be. Don't know what I'm going to be doing. I hope I'll see you next week on Darker Than Blue. And I might have another dark room, because I didn't even get to talk about all of the shit that DLC did during the Clinton administration. The 90s, oh my God, the 90s was like, the 90s was like opening the gates of neoliberal hell. And we got to talk about it. So yeah, I think I'm gonna pick up with the rest of this conversation on the DLC and why their impact today is still felt. And really, after this, I don't know why anybody wants to keep voting for the Democrats, but I do what I can. Thanks so much, y'all. Appreciate you. Peace.